What if I told you that a single hour-long podcast conversation could become a weapon? Not just a source of gossip, but a meticulously chosen battleground in a relentless media war. What if I told you that a seemingly innocent discussion about a Hollywood movie could be forensically dissected and used to architect one of the most brutal character takedowns of the year? This is the story of how a calculated public relations move by Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was hijacked and transformed into a global spectacle of humiliation. It's the story of how political commentator Candace Owens launched a critique so sharp, so humorous, and so viral, it didn't just question Meghan's character. It sought to define it permanently in the public consciousness as the embodiment of modern narcissism. We're going beyond the headlines and the clickbait claims of tears on live TV. Today, we are analyzing the anatomy of a media takedown. We'll examine the strategy, the execution, and the fallout from the podcast appearance that ignited a firestorm. Asking the critical question, was this a moment of genuine insight into the Duchess's personality, or was it the masterful execution of a targeted media assassination? Stick around, because the details are more calculated than you could ever imagine. To understand the explosion, we must first understand the setup. In the complex world of post-royal life, every public appearance by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex is a strategic move on a global chessboard. It's about brand building, narrative, control, and maintaining relevance. The decision for Meghan Markle to appear as a guest on a popular cultural podcast was, by all accounts, a carefully considered play. The chosen platform was perfect. It was a space celebrated for its intelligent, progressive, and often female-led conversations. It offered the Duchess an environment where she could appear relaxed, thoughtful, and in touch, far from the stuffy confines of royal protocol. The goal was clear: to present Meghan not as a controversial royal figure, but as a relatable intellectual peer, a global citizen contributing to the cultural zeitgeist. Her team likely anticipated a warm reception, positive press, and a welcome boost to her public image. She was entering a friendly territory, a media safe space designed to showcase the best version of herself. The topics were broad, covering everything from entertainment to social issues, giving her a perfect canvas on which to paint a portrait of a compassionate and engaged public figure. On paper, the plan was flawless. The podcast was meant to be a checkmate, but they failed to account for one of the most formidable players in the conservative media landscape, who was watching Meghan's every move. Enter Candace Owens, a commentator who has built an empire on unflinching, often incendiary critiques of liberal figures and modern culture. For Owens, Meghan Markle isn't just a public figure. She represents a particular brand of celebrity activism that Owens frequently targets. As the podcast episode aired, Owens wasn't just listening. She was analyzing, taking notes, and preparing her counterattack. On her own platform, Owens unleashed a forensic and utterly devastating breakdown of Markle's performance. Her critique was not a fleeting insult, it was a structured argument, delivered with the precision of a prosecutor and the theatricality of a seasoned performer. Her central thesis was that Meghan Markle is afflicted with a terminal case of self-obsession. Owens argued that the Duchess is fundamentally incapable of engaging with any topic, no matter how distant from her own life, without systematically redirecting the conversation back to herself.
She painted a picture of a woman so consumed with her own narrative that she views the world, its people, and its art only through the prism of her own experience. Owens used phrases like a masterclass in narcissism and profoundly unself-aware, framing the podcast not as a conversation, but as a psychological case study. This wasn't just criticism, it was a declaration of war on the carefully constructed brand of Meghan Markle. To build her case, Owens knew she needed a smoking gun. She found it in a discussion about Quentin Tarantino's iconic 2003 film Kill Bill. This moment would become the centerpiece of her viral takedown. The podcast panel began to explore the film's legacy, its stylish violence, its feminist undertones, and the powerful archetype of its protagonist, Beatrix Kiddo, a woman left for dead who rises to exact methodical revenge on those who wronged her. It was a rich topic for cultural analysis. According to Owens' account, as the other panelists shared their insights on the film's artistic merit, Meghan saw an opportunity. Owens alleges that the Duchess deftly intercepted the conversation. Instead of discussing the character of the bride, Meghan began to become the bride. She allegedly started drawing parallels between the film's narrative of betrayal and revenge and her own highly publicized battles with the British press, and implicitly, the royal family. Owens argued that Markle co-opted the film's symbolism, recasting herself as the wronged protagonist and her critics as the villains she must vanquish. To Owens, this was the ultimate proof. It was, in her words, breathtakingly audacious. To take a beloved piece of pop culture and remold it into a personal allegory, live in a public forum, was presented as the pinnacle of self-absorption. This one example was so vivid, so easily understood, that it became a viral shorthand for Owens' entire argument. The Kill Bill incident was no longer a film discussion. It was Exhibit A in the public trial of Meghan Markle's character. Owens didn't just report on it, she weaponized it. But Owens' critique didn't stop at Kill Bill. Her argument was that this was not an isolated slip-up, but a deep-seated, consistent pattern of behavior. To build this case, she alluded to a broader pathology visible throughout the entire podcast. Let's imagine, based on Owens' framework, how other topics might have been handled. A discussion on the challenges of modern motherhood, for instance. While other panelists might speak about universal struggles, juggling careers, societal pressures, Owens would argue that Meghan's contribution would inevitably circle back to the unique and unprecedented challenges of raising children under the intense glare of global media scrutiny, subtly positioning her experience as more profound and more difficult than anyone else's. Or consider a segment on philanthropy and charitable work. A typical discussion would focus on causes, strategies, and the impact of giving. According to the logic of Owens' critique, Meghan would steer the conversation toward her own philanthropic endeavors, but with a twist. She would frame her work not just as helping others, but as a continuation of her personal battle against injustice, linking her charity to her own narrative of survival and resilience. By presenting a pattern of these conversational pivots, whether real or perceived, Owens moved her argument from a singular observation to a comprehensive diagnosis. She was telling her audience, this is not just what she did, this is who she is. It made the critique feel less like an opinion and more like an evidence-based conclusion, which is why it resonated so powerfully with her audience and with Markle's detractors. The digital fallout was a tidal wave. Owens' analysis, clipped and packaged into easily shareable videos, exploded across social media. The narrative she had crafted became the dominant and, for many, the only story of the podcast. The internet's verdict was swift and brutal. This is where the infamous crying on live TV claim emerged. It appeared in the title of a wildly popular YouTube video summarizing the events. To be clear, there is no credible, widespread evidence of this ever happening. It was almost certainly a piece of strategic hyperbole, clickbait, designed to maximize emotional impact and viewership. But its truthfulness was irrelevant. Its purpose was to escalate the narrative from a simple critique to a story of personal devastation. It framed Owens as the victor and Markle as the vanquished, emotionally defeated on a public stage. This moment highlights the mechanics of the modern media machine. A core critique, Owens' analysis, is amplified by sensationalism, the crying claim, and algorithmically promoted to an audience already primed to believe it. This is how a narrative is forged. For millions of people, Meghan Markle's podcast appearance will forever be defined not by what she actually said, but by the story that Candace Owens and the subsequent media frenzy told about it. However, to present a complete picture, we must ask the question, was this truly a fair critique? Or was it another chapter in what many perceive as a relentless, racially tinged harassment campaign against the Duchess? Supporters of the Duchess would argue that Owens' analysis deliberately lacks context and compassion. They would say that of course Meghan relates topics back to her own life. Her life has been anything but normal. She has been subjected to a level of global scrutiny, criticism, and racist abuse that few people on Earth could ever comprehend. Her experiences are unique, and therefore her perspective is unique. To share that perspective, her supporters argue, is not narcissism. It is an act of vulnerability and an attempt to connect. Furthermore, they would point to the source. Candace Owens has a clear political and ideological agenda. Her critique was not born in a vacuum. It serves her brand and the interests of a media ecosystem that thrives on anti-Markle content. They would argue you cannot separate her commentary from the broader, often vicious campaign against a woman of color who dared to challenge a powerful, ancient institution. In this light, Owens isn't a truth teller. She's a bully, using her platform to punch down on a woman who is a constant target. This perspective sees the podcast critique not as analysis, but as another calculated attack in a long and ugly war. So what is the ultimate takeaway from the podcast Firestorm? In the end, this was never truly about a conversation. It was about control. It was a brutal battle in the ongoing war for the narrative. Meghan Markle attempted to use the podcast to project a carefully curated image of herself. Relatable, intelligent, and compassionate. Candace Owens saw this as an act of public deception and with surgical precision dismantled it, replacing it with her own narrative, that of a self-obsessed narcissist. This incident is a perfect case study for our digital age. It demonstrates that the original intent of an action is now secondary to the power of its interpretation. It shows how a skilled media operator can seize control of a story, reshape it, and broadcast it to millions, solidifying a perception that may be impossible to undo. Whether Meghan Markle is a victim of relentless bullying or a master of self-serving narratives is a question that the public will continue to debate fiercely. But what is undeniable is that in the arena of public opinion, the most powerful person is not the one who speaks first. It's the one who tells the most compelling story about what was said. And that leaves us with one final, unsettling question for all of us. In an age where narratives can be so skillfully weaponized, how can we ever be sure of what the truth really is? I want to hear your verdict in the comments. Was Candace Owens' critique a fair and insightful analysis, or was it a biased and targeted hit piece? Let's have a real discussion. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth report. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive analysis, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. Until then, question everything.